My name is Violet Carson, 31 years old, a software engineer, and the daughter no one in the Wilkins family talks about, unless the printer jams or someone needs their email password reset. That evening, the Marlowe Hotel in downtown Chicago gleamed with crystal lighting. The 23rd floor ballroom was packed with designer suits, expensive evening gowns, and laughter laced between clinking champagne glasses. On the main stage, a massive banner hung overhead in gold lettering, celebrating $200 million in revenue. Wilkins Logistics. I sat at table number 3, among the founding family seats. On my left was my mother, Donna Wilkins, chairwoman of the board, who hasn't texted me in 3 years except to ask how to replace her phone. On my right, my sister Elena, 36, magna cum laude MBA, self-declared expert in people management, and, in my mother's eyes, extraordinary since diapers. The music stopped. Every eye turned to the stage as my mother stepped forward, mic in hand. Her voice rang out, calm and steady with every breath. Wilkins Logistics has gone through a remarkable year of transformation. Thanks to a revolutionary tech solution, we not only avoided bankruptcy, but shattered all previous revenue milestones. I kept my expression neutral, fingers gently holding my wine glass, my heartbeat steady but cold. She turned toward our table, her lips curling into a smile, but not in my direction. And to honor the person who led this transformation, who represented our company in every negotiation, inspired every department, I'm proud to present a $1.2 million leadership award to Elena Wilkins. The applause exploded. The entire room rose to their feet, cheering my sister like a newly crowned queen. I didn't stand, didn't move, just raised my glass to my lips, barely touching the rim, though my hand shook enough to make the ice clink inside. Elena walked to the stage, her red gown sparkling with triumph. She turned toward our mother, accepted the symbolic check, and exchanged a poised embrace. The spotlight caught both their glowing faces as she took the mic, her voice confident. I'm truly grateful to be given the chance to lead during such a pivotal time. But innovation doesn't appear out of nowhere. It's the result of a team's effort. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge my sister, Violet, for her technical support. She just called 6 months of solo software development support. I smiled politely, nodded like her thank you meant anything. No one saw me work nearly sleepless nights for over half a year. No one in that room raising their glasses knew Elena had never once stepped foot in the basement lab, where I alone wrote tens of thousands of lines of code, debugging by the minute, building an entirely new operations system that saved the very company our father once built. No one knew, but I did. And there was one more thing neither my mother, nor Elena, nor anyone clapping in that room knew. I had never signed over the intellectual property rights for that software to Wilkins Logistics. The silence behind my polite mask wasn't surrender. It was preparation. I was ready for tomorrow morning. 6 months ago, on the first Monday of the new quarter, my mother called an emergency executive meeting on the 18th floor, the one reserved for important people. I wasn't invited. But I still heard everything through the internal security system I had quietly upgraded under the pretense of enhanced cybersecurity. Wilkins Logistics' largest client, Stanton Chemicals, had issued an ultimatum. If the shipment tracking system wasn't upgraded within 3 months, they'd terminate the entire contract. A move like that would wipe out nearly 40% of the company's revenue. In simple terms, bankruptcy was looming. No one had a solution. Elena suggested temporarily outsourcing a third-party firm to restructure our delivery workflow. My mother nodded in agreement, while I, sitting in a small office on the ground floor between 3 monitors and a cup of cold coffee, just laughed quietly. They really thought outsourcing would solve a data disaster? Like Wilkins Logistics? That was the moment I decided I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I was going to rewrite the company's future. And this time, I'd rewrite my own role in it too. My name had never once appeared in any official meeting minutes, but that night I began building the first framework for a new application, one that would later become known as VeraFlow. I worked from my two-bedroom apartment in Evanston, my desk pressed against the window overlooking the train tracks, where every 20 minutes the metal wheels sliced through the silence. Every line of code I wrote was a step away from my sister's shadow. Every sleepless hour was an investment in myself, not in the title of technical assistant they had slapped on me. I didn't request a budget, didn't touch the company's servers. All tests were run on my personal laptop, temporarily connected to a sandbox environment I created in the cloud. Not a single byte of corporate data was compromised. I documented every milestone in a private, double-encrypted repository backed up across 3 separate platforms. I wasn't just writing code. I was building evidence. 3 months later, when the old tracking system suffered a major failure that misplaced Stanton's shipments across 3 states, my mother began to panic. I walked into the boardroom with a short presentation. No effects, no colors. This is VeraFlow. It integrates real-time tracking, predictive analytics, and automated route coordination. I've tested it with simulated data for the past 90 days. Error margin is under 2%. We can launch within 2 weeks. The room went completely silent. Elena was the first to speak. Violet, you did this alone? I looked her straight in the eye. Not everyone needs a team to create something that matters. My mother said nothing throughout the presentation. When I finished, she gave a slight nod and said, "Proceed, but keep it internal." I understood. If VeraFlow succeeded, the credit would be appropriately redistributed like it always was. I gritted my teeth and agreed, because back then, my only goal was to save the company. Within just 45 days of pilot implementation, VeraFlow reduced shipping errors by 62% and saved nearly $4.2 million in late penalties and return costs. Stanton not only stayed, they signed a 5-year extension. 3 other major partners reached out requesting system demos. Revenue jumped from $48 million to $200 million in under 6 months, the company celebrated. Everyone except me. No one asked who built VeraFlow, no congratulatory email, no public acknowledgement. What I got instead was an email from legal titled Proposed Internal Tech Ownership Update, which read, according to general policy, any product developed by an employee during working hours or using company resources shall be considered intellectual property of Wilkins Logistics. I read that line again and again. Then I opened my laptop and typed into my personal log. VeraFlow was not written during work hours, did not use company assets, had no assigned contract. They can't touch it. 2 days after the gala, I received an email from HR with a short subject line, job title update. I already knew what it would say before I opened it. Congratulations, Violet Carson, on your appointment as Chief Technology Officer of Wilkins Logistics. This role reflects your outstanding technical contributions to the company's internal tech transformation. You will report directly to CEO Elena Wilkins. No meeting, no invitation to discuss, just a signed, finalized decision. I was given a new title, a 28% salary increase, and a gold-plated leash. Elena stopped by my office that afternoon, holding 2 cups of coffee like it was some casual sister chat. I glanced at the Starbucks she handed me, almond milk, unsweetened, exactly what I drink every morning. She remembered details. She never understood meaning. Not excited about the promotion, she asked, voice as soft as down feathers, but her eyes had that same gleam I once saw in our mother, caution wrapped in charm. If it were real recognition, maybe they should have offered it before I wrote the entire system, I replied, flat and direct. She smiled, settling into the chair across from me and placing her cup on the desk. Violet, Mom doesn't admit mistakes easily. I think making you CTO is the best way to keep things stable. You're still in charge of the tech, still the one who built the product. Leadership, though, it takes soft skills, the kind you don't really have. I looked up and locked eyes with her. Are you saying I don't belong near a microphone, or that you don't belong near a keyboard? This time, her smile faded. I'm not here to argue, Violet. I just want you to understand that mom chose what's best for the company and for you. No one wants a family mess over someone's ego. Ego? She was talking to me about ego? I sat upright. I built VeraFlow alone. I wasn't paid beyond my engineer's salary. I wasn't invited to the stage, wasn't mentioned in the speech. Not a single internal document names me as the lead developer. And now I get a title to stabilize my ego? Elena didn't answer. She just shrugged. Here are people who build things, and there are people who make those things known to the world. You need me more than you think, Violet. I nodded, not in agreement, but because I'd seen enough. After she left, I reopened the copyright registration. The certificate had just arrived from the U.S. Copyright Office that morning, under sole owner, Violet Carson. I printed 3 copies. One went to my attorney, one stayed at home. The last I placed in a sealed envelope labeled confidential and took it to my mother's office. Donna Wilkins didn't like being presented with finished facts. She once bankrupted a partner company for launching a product too similar to ours, before it had been approved. Her office sat on the 21st floor, off limits to regular staff without appointments. I didn't make one. I used the private elevator badge, part of a system I'd helped code 3 years ago when I rebuilt the building's access control. The doors opened. Her assistant looked startled. I need to see my mother, now. She started to dial in, but my mother's voice came from inside. Let her in. She was standing by the tall windows, the city glowing behind her in the afternoon light. Without turning, she asked. I placed the envelope on her desk. VeraFlow doesn't belong to Wilkins Logistics. It's my personal property. This is the official copyright. She turned, her gaze like steel. You're playing with fire, Violet. Don't make yourself a threat to your own family's company. I'm not threatening anyone, but I won't let anyone steal my work again. Being CTO doesn't make me forget who received the $1.2 million award, and it doesn't erase that I worked an entire year with 0 credit. She looked at me, silent for 3 seconds. So what do you want? Recognition and control over the future of the technology I created. The silence stretched long enough for me to hear a printer humming from the next room. Finally, she sat down, opened the envelope, and pulled out the documents. As her eyes landed on the words sole owner, I watched her hand tighten around her reading glasses. I knew then she wasn't just looking at a legal paper. She was staring at the first crack in the throne she'd held on to for far too long. I walked out of my mother's office without saying another word. She didn't slam the desk or raise her voice like I once imagined. She simply stared at the document with a frozen expression, furious yet unable to show it. It was the first time I'd ever seen her lose control. As soon as I stepped into the elevator, I called Heather Lincoln, an intellectual property attorney who had once been named one of Chicago's top 40 under 40. An old friend from the AI community had introduced her to me last year after a software rights conference. Heather, I need to meet within the next 24 hours. Is this about VeraFlow? She asked, unsurprised. Yes. I think the game just started. The next morning, I opened my laptop in my apartment, shut off all company emails, and accessed a triple encrypted folder labeled VFL Master Proofs. Inside were the complete development log, including creation and update timestamps from my personal GitHub. Auto-recorded time-lapse videos from my webcam over 6 months of working at home, 20 seconds per night of code sessions. Draft emails to myself containing system architecture outlines, each tagged with precise timestamps from Gmail's servers. And finally, a comparative document listing every feature VeraFlow had that no previous Wilkins Logistics system ever offered. I sent the entire package to Heather with a note. Make sure they can't call this an assigned task. This is a personal work of authorship. An hour later, Heather called me back. Violet, I've reviewed everything. This isn't just evidence. This is a blade. If needed, we could drive it straight through the heart of Wilkins Logistics without spilling a drop. But I don't want to stab anyone, I interrupted. I want to force them to back off. I don't want to destroy the company my father built, but I won't let them keep treating me like Alina's shadow. Then we use a different tactic, Heather replied, her voice sharp as glass. A licensing agreement. You're not denying them access to VeraFlow, but in exchange you gain authority over how it's managed and a fair share of the profits it generates. Legal, logical, bulletproof. And if they refuse? Then VeraFlow disappears. They can't replace it quickly, and if they try to replicate it, you have grounds to sue. I took a long breath. This wasn't about recognition anymore. This was a power game, and I was holding the queen. That afternoon, I stepped into Heather's law office on the 33rd floor of the Drake and Monroe building, navy carpet, polished walnut desks, and an atmosphere colder than a server room. We spent 4 hours reviewing every line of the licensing agreement. How do you want the revenue share structured? Heather asked, skimming the financial section. 10% net from all contracts that involve VeraFlow, and I retain control over all version updates. Bold, she said, grinning, but fair. We printed 6 copies. 1 would be sent to Wilkins Logistics' general counsel, 2 would be presented at the upcoming board meeting, the remaining 3 were sealed, just in case they tried to twist anything. When's the meeting? Heather asked. In 2 days, my mother called for an emergency session to discuss technology transition strategy. I smirked. They think I'm going to hand over VeraFlow willingly? I think they're in for a surprise. That night, I stood alone on my balcony, looking out over the city glowing in the dark. Every window was a life, every car light a decision. And me? I was no longer the engineer in the basement, no longer the daughter compared to her sister for 30 years. I was the one who wrote VeraFlow, the one with proof, the one holding the copyright. The board meeting was scheduled for exactly 9 a.m., held in the large conference room on the 20th floor, the same room where my father had presided for nearly 2 decades before he passed away. Today, that chair belonged to my mother. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, hair pulled back neatly. Heather walked beside me, carrying a thick black leather file. The room fell silent as we entered. All 8 board members were already seated. Familiar faces, 3 of my father's longtime friends, 2 major outside shareholders, 1 legal representative from our advisory firm, and of course, Elena and my mother. My mother looked up, voice calm but her gaze icy. Violet, what do you think you're doing, bringing a lawyer to a family meeting? I sat down, meeting her stare directly. If this were truly a family meeting, I should have been invited from the start. But since the invitation labeled this as a strategic session concerning technological assets, I thought legal representation might be appropriate. Elena shifted in her seat. My mother gripped the armrests tightly. Heather said nothing, simply opened her case, removed 8 copies of a document, and distributed them one by one. This is the official licensing agreement for the VeraFlow system, developed and copyrighted by Miss Violet Carson, Heather said, her tone crisp and unwavering. The documents include the certificate of ownership, development logs, and terms for continued usage should Wilkins Logistics wish to retain access to this technology. Several board members immediately lowered their eyes to review the contents. The first to speak was Warren McTavish, a former associate of my father, now a senior board member. You're saying VeraFlow doesn't belong to the company? That's correct, Heather replied. Based on technical and legal evidence, the majority of the system was developed off-moon, using personal equipment, without any formal work assignment. Wilkins Logistics' use of VeraFlow over the past 6 months has been, in effect, unlicensed. Although Miss Carson has not previously objected, I added quietly, I never wanted a war. But I can't keep being sidelined in something I built. My mother shoved the document aside. This is a blatant betrayal. You're using legalese to force your family to its knees? Not my family, I said slowly. A power structure that stifles creativity with titles, favoritism, and silence. The air in the room thickened. Elena let out a dry laugh. So what do you want? A ransom for the tech? A co-CEO title? I looked around the room, pausing on Warren. I want to separate VeraFlow from Wilkins Logistics to form a standalone entity, Carson Systems, a company that provides technology solutions to the logistics industry. Wilkins Logistics can be the first strategic client under one condition: acknowledge intellectual property rights, sign a formal licensing agreement, and allow me full authority over the tech's operations. My mother gave a scoffing laugh without sound. You think the board will approve splitting the company in two? Warren set the document down and looked up. I worked with your father. He used to say Violet was the only one in the family who could see the future before it arrived. If this system is truly transformative, then separating it is no different than when he opened the first Dallas branch, called Reckless at the time, but it saved the entire company. Another member, Gertrude, who held 7% of shares, nodded. We need to think long term. No one disputes that VeraFlow is the only reason we survived the recent crisis. Continuing to depend on it without a legal framework is a much bigger risk. The more support I gained, the quieter my mother became. But I saw her hand begin to tremble slightly, something she had always hidden well beneath her composed exterior. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, the board voted. 6 votes in favor of forming Carson Systems, with me as its CEO. Wilkins Logistics would sign a licensing agreement for VeraFlow, paying royalties based on revenue. Elena would remain head of traditional logistics operations. My mother, for the first time ever, lost the majority in a vote that shifted internal power. As everyone filed out, my mother rose slowly and turned to face me. Your father taught you how to code, but maybe he also taught you how to command a stage. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. That same evening, before the meeting minutes had even been emailed, I began drafting my final counterproposal. This wasn't going to be a compromise like the licensing agreement Heather had drawn up. This time, I was rewriting the rules entirely. I refused to let Carson Systems be a subsidiary slapped onto the Wilkins brand. I didn't create a company to be the tech sidekick for people who only knew how to raise a champagne glass once the work was finished. If this was a new era, then it deserved a new structure. No legacy strings, no inherited chains. By 2 a.m., I sent the revised proposal to Heather for legal review. Subject line: no more shadows. I'll be my own son. 4 days later, I returned to the boardroom on the 20th floor. This time, I didn't bring a thick file or a lawyer seated beside me. Just an iPad and the boldest counterattack I'd ever written. Before we sign any licensing deal with Wilkins Logistics, I began, casting my slides onto the large screen. I'm proposing a full restructuring of our partnership model. My mother crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. Elena leaned back in her chair, openly sneering, but the rest of the board began jotting notes. Carson Systems will not be a subsidiary. It will be a fully independent legal entity with its own board of directors, not appointed by Wilkins Logistics. For the first year, the board will consist of 5 members: myself, Heather Lincoln, and 3 supply chain tech experts from outside the family, none of Elena's MBA classmates. I flip to the next slide. VeraFlow will be licensed to Wilkins Logistics for the first 36 months, with a royalty of 7% on all revenue tied to services using the system. After that, the agreement will be renegotiated based on market value. No exclusivity clause? One board member asked. No, I replied instantly. VeraFlow is a scalable platform that can be adapted across multiple sectors: healthcare, aviation logistics, even pharmaceutical distribution. Carson Systems reserves the right to expand. Wilkins Logistics will be the first client, but not the only one. The room began to murmur. I continued. And lastly, every VeraFlow upgrade will be reevaluated by functionality. There will be no scenario where a multi-million-dollar enhancement is delivered at yesterday's price. My mother clenched her jaw, her eyes locked on mine. You're trying to walk away from your family? She said, her voice stripped of polish, dry and cracking. After everything your father and I built? I met her stare, calm and direct. I'm not trying to walk away. I just don't think the family ever let me stand beside them. The room fell silent. Elena bit her lip, but didn't interrupt. And if the board rejects this? My mother asked. If we vote it down? At that moment, I opened an email I'd received earlier that morning from John Markwell, Vice President of Strategy at Evergreen Freight, one of the largest logistics groups on the East Coast. I shifted the screen to display it. Subject: Strategic Partnership with Carson Systems. We're prepared to negotiate Northeast exclusivity if Veriflow can be tailored for our container distribution model. Starting offer: $4.2 million per year for a 3-year package, excluding technical support. No one said a word. Heather leaned in and whispered in my ear, "That's not just leverage. That's a warning shot to anyone trying to strangle your vision." Warren, the same board member who had supported me in the previous meeting, spoke first. "I support the restructuring. This is a chance for both sides to grow. Wilkins Logistics keeps access to Veriflow, and Violet doesn't have to sacrifice her ownership for recognition." "I agree," Gertrude added. "It's the most civilized way to avoid litigation and an internal collapse." The vote was swift. 6 out of 8 approved. Elena voted no. My mother abstained. A quiet refusal to endorse, but also a quiet surrender. But the board had spoken. When I walked out of that room, no one stopped me this time. Carson Systems was officially incorporated 1 week later. Its headquarters sat in River North, just 14 blocks from my mother's office, but a world away. I hung a single photo on my wall, my father and me seated side by side in front of the first computer he ever bought me when I was 13. Below it, I taped a simple line: "If you build it yourself, you have the right to keep it." 6 months after Carson Systems officially launched, I stood on the main stage at the National Logistics Technology Conference in Boston. The spotlight hit me directly as the host announced, "Violet Carson, founder of Carson Systems, recipient of this year's National Logistics Innovation Award for the Veriflow platform, which has transformed operations across the industry." Applause thundered through the ballroom. In that moment, I glanced down at the VIP section. Elena wasn't there, but my mother was, seated in the center, wearing a deep gray dress, her expression unreadable. She didn't clap, but she didn't take her eyes off me either. I walked up and accepted the cube-shaped award. Crafted from recycled steel, symbolizing resilience and reinvention. 2 concepts I now understood more intimately than anyone. I stood at the microphone, ignoring the speech I had written in advance. Instead, I spoke plainly, clearly. I built Veriflow alone, during nights no one saw. I founded Carson Systems not out of revenge, but to exist in alignment with my worth. Someone once said I was just a capable tech girl. But today, I run a platform used by over 40 major logistics companies, saving them hundreds of millions each quarter. I paused, my eyes still on my mother. Recognition doesn't always come from kin. It comes when you prove you can't be replaced. Not through connections, not through legacy, but through vision and relentless work. After the speech, I stepped off the stage, shaking hands with executives from several major firms. My mother remained seated, but as I passed her row, she slowly stood. "Do you have a few minutes?" Her voice was neither cold nor sharp, just even. For the first time. We walked out to the balcony behind the conference hall, where the soft light and wind off the Charles River filled the quiet. I crossed my arms, waiting. She looked me straight in the eyes. "I used to think companies needed control, discipline, someone to run them with a firm hand. I never believed in anything that relied too much on ideas. But you proved me wrong." I didn't say anything. "I was wrong, Violet. About you, about Veriflow, about forcing you to sit silently next to Elena all those years." The wind picked up. I saw her hand tighten around the railing. "Your father used to say you saw what others missed. I didn't listen to him. Now no one in this family can deny it. You've won." I tilted my head slightly. "But that's the saddest part, you know. I had to fight like a stranger just to be heard, in my own family." She was quiet. "If you had nodded at the right time, I wouldn't have needed a lawyer. If Elena had spoken one honest sentence, I wouldn't have needed a board vote." "I understand," she said, nodding. "But understanding came too late." I exhaled, not angry anymore. I had learned to separate emotion from goal. I wasn't here to seek fairness from someone who never gave me a chance. I was here to take the place I had earned. A few minutes later, she left without another word. I returned to the hall, continued shaking hands, receiving summit invitations, signing partnership contracts. Carson Systems had just finalized its expansion deal with Future Freight, one of the nation's largest medical transport systems. Next quarter's revenue was projected to reach $480 million. No one asked me if I was Elena's sister anymore. No one mentioned Wilkins Logistics as the source of my success. They spoke of VeraFlow as the new industry standard, of Carson Systems as a rising independent force, of me, Violet Carson, as someone who had redefined the field. That night, I returned to my office, opened a bottle of white wine that had been chilling for 2 weeks, and sat by the window watching the city lights blink like ellipses between chapters of a long story. On my desk sat the old laptop I had used to write VeraFlow's very first lines of code. Its screen faded, the keyboard still stained with coffee from one of the project's final nights. I ran my fingers over it, not out of nostalgia, but out of clarity. Success doesn't come from a single breakthrough. It comes from silent hours, lines of code written when no one is watching, from being ignored, dismissed, yet continuing anyway. And sometimes, the deepest form of revenge is no longer needing revenge at all. A succeeding so undeniably that no one can erase your name from the story, no matter how hard they once tried. The story of Violet Carson reminds us that in real life, recognition doesn't always come from family or authority. It must be earned through ability and unwavering determination. When pushed aside and underestimated, she didn't argue. She created undeniable value. True success isn't about revenge. It's about rising so far beyond expectations that even those who once dismissed you are forced to acknowledge you. It's the strongest, quietest way to reclaim your rightful place. What are your thoughts on Violet's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, justice, and reclaiming your worth.